Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and welcome to the breaking news. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and support us on Patreon, link in the description below. Today, within a secured facility in the Russian Federation, a major explosion occurred near the small town of Izhevsk. Izhevsk, while being a much smaller town within the Russian Federation, poses a key strategic city, with the Kalashnikov companies, or the Kalashnikov concerns, main factory being within the city limits, as well as the Lada factory also being within Izhevsk as well, or at least one of the Lada factories being within Izhevsk. Another facility that is incredibly important nearby is a rocket launch facility, or a rocket engine testing facility at the city of Izhevsk. We don't know exactly what has caused this explosion, but right now there are three different running theories about what this massive explosion is. Many people have been going that this is apparently an explosion at the secure facility that tests rocket motors and engines. Some of these rocket motors and engines are used on cruise missiles and ballistic missiles that are, of course, used by the Russian Federation to attack Ukrainian cities. But you see here a film from an apartment building showing the massive fireball out in the distance away from the city. And we hear this low rumbling roar in the video clip. And I'll be playing it one more time so that way y'all can hear the audio. In our next video clip, we once again got a different perspective of this explosion off in the distance, and once again, from the video footage that we can tell, this appears to be a good ways away from the city of Izhevsk itself, possibly suggesting that it is the secured facility where the rocket engines are tested at.
Завод какой-то или что? Пиздец, бля.
Moving on to our last video, here's our last angle of the explosion and fire. Specific details are not forthcoming about this explosion, as the information was only published a mere hour ago at the time of filming. Unfortunately, we have no real idea what was causing the explosion, whether it be a failure of one of the motors or engines that was being tested at the facility, or whether it was some kind of a partisan or Ukrainian attack that led to the subsequent explosion and probably significant damage that was caused at the testing site. We're not exactly certain. Nevertheless, the explosion is a severe one, and if it is a Ukrainian attack, which is not entirely out of the realm of possibility, this will be the deepest strike that the Ukrainian armed forces have been able to conduct with a drone attack. Measuring the distance from the borders of Ukraine to the city of Izhevsk, it is about an 850-mile jaunt. We have seen a drone fly past Nizhny Novgorod, almost around to the area near Cheboksary, just in between Nizhny Novgorod and Kazan, which is a distance of approximately 600 miles, showing that Ukrainian drones are certainly starting to become far longer range in their abilities than we have seen prior before. That would once again further the idea that a Ukrainian drone attack could possibly reach the city of Izhevsk, and we've also seen possible rumors that there was a Ukrainian drone attack that hit electrical substations within the major city of Chelyabinsk and ended up knocking out the power for a third of the city for several days, if not a week. This all could be indicating that this is a part of a larger Ukrainian strategy to start interdicting higher functions of the Russian Federation, oil production and storage, as well as the ability to test and produce new kinds of weapon systems, much like the ones that may be tested at Izhevsk. But once again, we have really no idea what caused the explosion at the moment. All we have are reports of a large explosion, and we'll most likely be able to get more updates and more information on that within the following hours. Moving on from that and into the city of Belgorod, we do know that Ukrainian forces have continued attacks on the major cities near the Ukrainian border region inside of Russia, as the air raid alarms went off over the city of Belgorod just a mere few hours ago, and people within the city pulled out their cameras and began to record. From what we understand, these are Ukrainian drone attacks targeting strategic infrastructure around the city of Belgorod, and the Russian air defense apparently detected the incoming drones and for one of the few times ever sounded off the alarm. We can hear the explosions. I hear one Russian apparently getting really patriotic. Ukrainian air attacks have actually been getting a lot more consistent and a lot more prevalent as the war has gone on. Ukrainian drone strategy has shifted not only from frontline tactical uses of drones within a few miles of the operating unit to actual drone units made to strike deep within Russian lines. We have seen that this unit has started to become wildly effective, or the multiple units that are conducting these drone attacks have been becoming wildly effective. With drone attacks hitting the Lukoil facility near Volgograd, we've also seen more drone attacks hitting as far north as Ust-Luga, a whopping 560 miles away from the borders of Ukraine, and also hitting one of the largest oil storage sites within northern Russia. Once again, showing that the Ukrainians are starting to try and take a overall grand strategy approach to this war. Instead of trying to fight the Russians within Ukraine itself, they're trying to destroy Russian abilities on their home front before the Russian army can even think about fighting inside of Ukraine itself. This has been argued to show that the Ukrainians are certainly trying to make this war look a lot more viable for Western support, as Ukrainian abilities, even greatly impaired due to a lack of US support, are continuing to strike very effectively and at a very high rate with minimal resources provided to them. At the same time, however, we are seeing that some of the resources that are provided to them have been received with open arms and have been very happily shown by the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian armed forces, as we got to see a Nasam air defense system in an area of Ukraine. Unfortunately, we do not know exactly where this is. I put it down in the Kyiv Oblast, but the marker is probably wildly inaccurate. But nevertheless, we do get to see one of the Nasam systems. The Nasams is a shorter range air defense system with only a 16-mile launch radius where it can effectively intercept a target. It is certainly not a Patriot system that has, with a PAC-2 missile, around a 110-mile range, and with the PAC-3 and PAC-1, approximately 90 to 100-mile intercept range. A much larger area than the 16 miles that the Nasams covers. Nevertheless, the Nasams is a great air defense system for trying to maintain a small air defense perimeter, such for example around the city of Kyiv or other major cities like Kharkiv. We still don't know exactly where it is. It's a pretty good indicator that it's probably around a major city somewhere, but still, the marker's exact location is unknown. All we know is that this Ukrainian soldier is really happy to be operating in Nasams, and I'm sure that this has been providing amazing and incredible defense for the citizens of Ukraine. At the exact same time, the war grinds on the front lines, and of course many nations, and Ukraine itself, have been talking about the major disparity that's now being seen in between Ukrainian ammo usage and Russian ammo usage as far as heavy artillery is concerned. Heavy artillery is one of the main winners of this war, and we can see that at this moment, the Russians are massively outgunning the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are approximately firing around 2,000 to 3,000 artillery shells per day, and the Russians are firing an unbelievable and whopping 8 to 10,000 artillery rounds per day, outshooting the Ukrainians nearly 4 to 1 as far as the artillery battle is concerned. Many Western nations have been trying to focus on fixing this issue, or at least filling the gap as best as they can, and we have understood that apparently, the Europeans have decided that they are going to be trying to bring about a support package that'll be providing a total of 1 million artillery shells by the end of this year. That's according to Nexta on Twitter. This is something that sounds like an incredibly large number, but we actually did a little bit of number crunching before stream, and if 1 million artillery shells are to be provided from the very first day of this year to the very last day of this year, that means that Ukraine has approximately 2,700 artillery shells to use per day for their 155mm artillery systems that have been provided by NATO. That includes all of your Caesar SPGs, that also includes your Panzerhaubitze 2000, your M109s, your M777s, and every other kind of artillery system that I'm not naming at the moment, like the Archer SPG. All of those fire a 155mm artillery shell. The issue, however, with this is that it is still only 2,700 artillery shells per day, and still not accounting for the fact that the Ukrainians have a large amount of 152mm artillery systems of Soviet vintage that we still have not found a way to provide a sufficient amount of ammunition for. Going off of that, we could still see that while this support package is absolutely massive and a saving grace, a lifeline for Ukraine's artillery forces, it still is not providing the high numbers that are necessary to help the Ukrainians to match the Russians artillery shot for artillery shot in this war. But one thing we certainly have learned that the Ukrainians must have been outmatching the Russians on greatly is drone warfare, as the Russians have been making massive attempts, although mostly with failure, to try and find a way to get their drone forces to be as competent as the Ukrainians' drone forces are. This led Russia to buying a Shahed 136 and later on a Shahed 236 from the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Islamic Republic of Iran has been providing the Russian Federation with Shahed 136 drones for nearly a year and a half at this point. And from what we understand, from what some military bloggers have been able to find, apparently the Russian Federation has been paying almost 4.5 billion US dollars per year to import Iranian Shahed drones to then use on the Ukrainian armed forces and the nation of Ukraine as a whole. This is an unbelievable number. We actually assumed that the Shahed 136 was a fairly economic and affordable drone for the Russians, making them almost an inexhaustible supply for a very good price. However, a $4.5 billion price tag is incredibly high. To put that into perspective, a single Moskva-class missile cruiser costs approximately 500 million US dollars, 550 million US dollars to be exact. That means that at this cost, there is nearly 9 Moskva-class missile cruisers that the Russians could build each year, its original build price, for the cost of the Shahed drones that they've been importing. This is seeming to make it more so the case that instead of the Russians being able to easily use these drones in the future, they may actually start running into budgetary concerns and restrictions, considering that this originally would have been about 10% of the Russian military's annual spending budget if we're talking about their pre-war spending numbers. At this moment, we assume that the Russians are spending approximately 110 billion US dollars per year in their defense spending, which means that this still, just the Shaheds alone, make up nearly 5 to 6% of the Russians' annual expenditures so far in the war, which is a whopping number for something that has had such a low success rate as the Shahed. Only about 5 to 3% of all Shahed attacks actually make it through to their target and hit it. The other remaining 97 to 95% of all Shaheds that are launched towards Ukraine end up being intercepted and destroyed before they make it to their targets. Meaning that for the actual cost, when you really think about it, out of that $4.5 billion total that the Russians are spending on this whole ordeal, a very, very small fraction of that expenditure is actually making it to the target and actually hitting it, meaning that this is probably one of the most uneconomical pursuits that the Russian military has ever taken. Of course, it's not really a matter of casualties as in that perspective. It's more so a question of whether this is really economical for the Russians or not, and whether they will be able to afford to conduct operations like this in the future. And going off of those kinds of costs, simply to get the Shaheds and not even factoring in the crews that launched them and everything else, it probably is not going to be economical for the entire war, and they may actually have to either curve the number of Shaheds that they launch in a single attack, or they may even have to start curtailing the purchase of Shaheds and therefore decrease the number once more, or at least decrease the rapidity of the mass wave Shahed drone attacks. But nevertheless, that is all of the major news that we have for the past 24 hours here on this channel. I thank you all so much once again for watching. If I could, please make sure to subscribe, make sure to comment, and make sure to support us on Patreon. It does help us to make these video projects possible, and I will see you all in the next one. Thank you all once again, and take care.